Live on the YouTubes. Appreciate it. Okay, we are live. Hello, YouTube. How you doing? Somebody said yesterday, dang, you got off of YouTube all quick. It was all abrupt. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought I had said goodbye, but apparently I hit the button a little sooner than I anticipated. My bad. But I want to talk this morning about what's happening with regards to something that the Supreme Court did on Friday. The Supreme Court did a lot of things on Friday, but one of the things they also did was issue a decision that is going to impact school choice in some really important ways, particularly for Black families. And the reason this matters is because I've been using this phrase, I've been feeling this phrase in my spirit a whole lot. Y'all know that phrase in a Christian tradition? And I just said this to the Urban View family a minute on the previous, right before we went to commercial break. But that phrase that says, "What the devil meant for evil, the Lord will turn around for your good." And it shows up in a variety of different ways, this quote. But it is an important quote that I want you to remember as we have this conversation, because there's a lot happening with education right now. Oh, and if you are on YouTube, please like and subscribe and share and hit the little bell notification because all the things matter when it comes to algorithms. So, on Friday, last day of the Supreme Court's term, the Supreme Court issued a variety of opinions we had been waiting on for a really long time. One of those opinions was about school choice in a way, and not necessarily are you picking a charter school versus a public school, but really the type of choice that talks about what's happening in the actual classroom, okay? So let me just give you the breakdown, and then the phone lines are going to be open because we're going to have a community conversation today here at Urban View. The phone lines are 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. So on Friday, in addition to doing a whole lot of other things to destroy the planet, the world, and everything else that they could get their hands on, the Supreme Court also took a sledgehammer to some concepts within public education that we need to talk about. So we have this thing in the public education. Well, frankly, we have this thing in this country called the separation of church and state, which is to say that you can be as religious as you want to be, but the government is not able to force you into a particular religion, nor should the government favor any particular religion over others. Separation of church and state. A lot of people think that it's great. It's a part of the founding fathers. It's what they wanted, because one of the things the founding fathers were really clear about was that this was not a Christian nation. I know that really upset some of y'all, but you should just know that the history of this nation is that the founding fathers were really clear that this is not a Christian nation. That's why the separation of church and state is such a big deal. So some of you, however, are only in favor of not having a separation of church and state if the separation allows for Christianity to be at the forefront. Because a lot of people who think we shouldn't have separation of church and state, we should totally have the church involved in the state. You don't feel the same way if it's Islam. Right? A lot of people who think that we should not have a barrier we should not have a barrier that separates the church or religion and the state. You're perfectly fine if that barrier comes down for Christianity. Most people are not perfectly fine if it comes down for, say, Buddhism, right? Or say Islam, or say African traditional religions like Yoruba, right? Or like, so we got to ask ourselves, are you really in favor of church and state being joined, meaning religions of all sorts and the state being joined, or are you in favor of Christian supremacy? And if it's the latter, there's no judgment here. We listen and I judge a lot, but I won't be mean about it. I will not be mean about it, but I am going to judge you. But we got to ask these questions because of what the Supreme Court did on Friday. So on Friday, there was a case that came out of Maryland, and basically these parents in Maryland said that they wanted their children to be able to opt out. Or let me phrase it a little differently. They wanted to be able to opt their children out of reading storybooks that included LGBTQ plus themes or characters. Now, some of you already are like, well, that's a great idea because you don't like the gays. And that's okay. It's not okay. But we're going to accept it for now because I want to have this conversation. I don't want you to feel like you are excluded from the conversation because you don't like the gays. But we should question. Never mind. Let me move on. So this is the issue. See, I be trying not to editorialize, but sometimes I be trying to just focus, help a sister out. Just pray for a sister. Anyway, this opinion comes down. It's a 6-3 opinion. And the split was, as all the splits have been thus far, the 6 conservatives, which includes the hoes of the court, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, as opposed to the 3 liberals on the court, Justice Alana Kagan, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and my current fave, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. This opinion was written by Justice Sam Alito, who is one of the biggest hoes on the court. Now, he is lesser hoe than Clarence Thomas, and some of you might be thinking, well, that seems a little disrespectful to call the justices hoes. They're hoes. I have a whole song about Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito and their wives being hoes of the court because they are pimped out by the sugar billies who are really just sugar daddies who got billions of dollars. So just their hoes, I sing about it, and no, I'm not afraid to say it. Anyway, one of the biggest hoes on the court, the junior hoe, Sam Alito, he said the following. A government bears the religious exercise. A government burdens the religious exercise of parents when it requires them to submit their children to instruction that poses a very real threat of undermining the religious beliefs and practices that the parents wish to instill. I think a lot of religious parents might agree with that. I know when I was a kid, my religious parents would have agreed with that. And they're talking about a subset of books that the court goes into some detail about. And Sam Alito says that the storybooks at the center of the case, he says, are, quote, clearly designed to present certain values and beliefs as things to be celebrated and certain contrary values and beliefs as things to be rejected. Of course, as I mentioned, the 3 liberal justices dissented, but the ruling went largely that way. And basically, the school leaders said that this ruling is now going to disrupt what's happening in the classroom. And that's going to matter a lot because we got some questions that we got to ask ourselves as parents or as community members who live in communities with actual children in them. There are some things we have to figure out. And so let's follow this line of discussion a little bit so we can get to that part of the discussion. So, according to the school leaders, like the National Education Association, they said a decision like this will hamstring efforts to give students a full, engaging, and inclusive public education. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she dissented from the bench, and she said many school districts, and particularly the most resource-strapped, cannot afford to engage in costly litigation over opt-out rights or divert resources to tracking and managing student absences. Schools may instead censor their curricula, stripping material that risks generating religious objections. Here's why this matters, because what Sonia Sotomayor is saying is that the way you framed this opinion, it's basically going to disrupt what's happening in the classroom. Let's talk about the facts that led us to this point, because again, what the devil meant for evil, I think we're going to be able to turn around for our good if we play our cards right. So basically what was happening was there's this school district in Maryland, the largest school district, Montgomery County. There's 160,000 students who attend this school district. And there were several elementary school books that were introduced in October of 2022. Okay. Now, what was happening in around October of 2022? Remember, this was 2 years after, or 2 summers after the summer of George Floyd. So all these protests had taken place during the summer of 2020. Remember, during 2021, white parents who were very upset started formulating groups like Moms for Liberty. They started taking over school board meetings. They started harassing teachers and firing principals. They were really brawlic and aggressive, right? Being very, I want to see the manager when it comes to everything related to education, even though half the people who were involved didn't actually even have kids who were in these schools. The other half were parents who had never actually read the books. They had entire organizations set up in states like Florida that would just kind of use an AI approach to school censoring. And they would take titles of books and run it through their system, not actually reading any of the books, but if it had a word like gay or breast or penis in it, then it was going to be automatically banned, even if it were a book about your body or maturing or what happens when you go through puberty. Anyway, so this was all happening at around the same time. That context is important because of the rest of the conversation. So in October 22, these books were introduced because, again, this is a time where on the other side, a lot of parents are fighting for more equity. We're fighting for children to get access to materials and information that are going to meet the needs of diverse student populations. But teachers, when it came to these particular books, the books that included LGBTQ plus authors or characters or themes, were told, well, use the books the way you use all the books in your classroom. You don't need to do anything special. You could use them when you're doing whole class instruction. You could use these books in small groups. They could be shared among individual students who might enjoy them, or just have them available on shelves for students to discover. But it was a contentious situation because, again, we had all of these parents who were really riled up, many of them Black Christians. I'm gonna just say, can we just be honest? Can we have an honest conversation? Because this is about the same time that the AP history class for Black Studies was being rolled out. And one of the ways they were able to undermine the rollout of this effort was to go to key Black churches in key states like the state of Florida and basically say, did you know that the AP history course on Black history also includes a section on the gays? Oh my God, the gays are Black and they exist. And so because this optional section on gay Black people, and it was an optional section, it wasn't even a part of the core curriculum. What the hell? But gay people exist. So the fact that they exist was contained in this optional component of the AP history course. But because these folks who did not want AP Black history of any sort taught to anybody, particularly their white children, who they would never want exposed to the real history of this country, because then those white children would come home questioning why it is we have white privilege and why we don't like the Blacks. They didn't want that. And so because of that, they began getting really frustrated and wanted to opt out. And opting out can technically be fine until we start seeing what allows for the opt-out. So these books are in the classroom. Parents are upset about it. Not all parents, but enough parents that they decided to make an issue of it. So, and it wasn't even just that all the issues with the books that were being shared in October of 2022 were against gay people. There were some folks who had religious objections, yes, but there were other people who had a lot of secular objections. So it's not like this is all coming from one place. There were a lot of people who were upset that there was a drive for more equity and diversity in content in classrooms. Keep it 100. But that AP history course that I mentioned a minute ago, they were able to scuttle pretty much the entire rollout in a variety of states because they were able to tap into Black religious homophobia and basically had Black people advocating to not have the AP history course, because it included a section about the Black gays. Now, I want to be clear. This is not going to be one of those we're going to wag our finger at the Black church and act like they are the most homophobic, because they're not. Like, homophobia is a thing that happens in our country. It is pretty standard in our country, and it happens in a variety of denominations. It just so happens that the Black church in this particular moment, or should I say certain segments of the Black church in this particular moment, were able to be effectively used to essentially make sure that nobody got access to Black history. Similar to the way the what was that convention? The National Baptist Convention, the Black Convention, was like basically played by Target, and Target was like, well, we had initially promised we were going to give $250 million to deposit into Black-owned banks. We're not going to do that. We had also said we would invest $1 billion into Black businesses. We're not going to do that, but we will give this Black congregation $300,000 because they're a cheap date and it's easy for us to do that. We will sponsor Essence Fest. And even though we know that everybody's boycotting Target, Essence Fest is not obviously a part of the boycott. So people are like, well, just go past the installation. You done took the money. So we got to have just real conversations about what it means to participate in these sort of activities that undermine the sanctity of the Black community, so that you can get some personal benefit. That's just an aside. We'll talk about that later on another episode. Anyway, because parents were upset about this policy, they demanded an opt-out option. And the school district was like, all right, we'll give you an opt-out option. If you don't want to have your kid in the classroom while we're having this discussion about whatever, you can opt out of the classroom. And so many parents opted out that it created a lot of issues. Remember, this is the largest school district in the state of Maryland. So many parents opted out that basically there were too many students who were absent when the books were being used, and keeping track of the opt-outs was cumbersome, so they did not allow the opt-out feature to continue in the following school year. 3 of the families who were in the school district filed a lawsuit. They wanted an injunction from the court to basically restore the opt-out policy while the underlying case continued in the court. The trial judge was like, no, because what harm are you suffering because your child has to learn about other people? Like, that ain't an infringement on your constitutional rights. The trial court was like, no, like, what are you talking about? Go to class, like, get to school. Like, what is you doing? The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, when they appealed that decision, because they lost, when they appealed the decision, Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals was like, why are you bothering me with this? Go to class. You know how many kids got to sit in class and learn shit that they don't want to learn? And like, you up here upset because your kids got to learn that the gays exist? Go to class. The Supreme Court took a different approach because the Supreme Court is full of hoes. And basically, they appealed to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court essentially said, because at the lower court, when they said this is not going to infringe on your constitutional rights for you to have to learn something about other people that you don't like, the Supreme Court was like, absolutely not. I'm clutching my white supremacist pearls. Because the Supreme Court was like, actually, it is going to violate their rights to have to be exposed to things that these families disagree with. We got to talk about this, because if it's a violation of my religious beliefs and that's all we need for you to have to change your curriculum, I got some questions. I have questions about that, because if the lower court said it is not a violation of your constitutional rights for your children to be exposed to this material because gay people exist, there are gay people in this classroom, we should be able to have a book where if we got a book that says Keisha has a mommy and a daddy, we should be able to have a book that says Keisha has 2 mommies. Like, no one is saying one is better than the other. We're just saying that should, because we got kids in the classroom who got 2 mommies, and kids in the classroom who got 2 daddies, and kids in the classroom who got a mommy and a daddy, or just a daddy, or just a mommy. So we should not have just material that are going to focus on one family formulation. That is not a violation of your constitutional rights. The Supreme Court was like, I have clutched my pearls. They are alabaster white. And I'm very upset because according to the high court, these parents are most definitely entitled to a preliminary injunction because they are likely to prove that this instruction does indeed violate their religious beliefs. And my Christianity is so fragile. I got to button up my shirt. My Christianity is so fragile. How dare I be in a situation where I am exposed to information that I don't like or that makes me uncomfortable? I'm white. Oh, wait, I'm not. But I'm a Black Christian. Sorry. I don't even know what race these people are. This is a conversation for Black people because I got questions. Because according to the high court, if it's a violation of my religious beliefs, I should be able to opt out. So let's ask about this, because if that's the benchmark, I got some questions. I got some questions, because let's say that my religious beliefs are that Black people really are supposed to be lifelong enslaved. Because my interpretation of the Old Testament, which I only read when I want some Bible verses to damn somebody to hell because I want to be judgmental. What if I believe that Black people, according to my interpretation of what happened with Noah, Ham, and Canaan and Japheth, what is it? Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. I can't remember the name of Noah's children. That's how long it's been since I done studied that part of the Bible. But according to what happened in that part of the Bible, the white nationalist Americans said that meant that Black people were supposed to be enslaved forever. If I believe that, and that's my religious belief, and does that mean that I don't have to sit in history classes that talk about the Civil War? If I believe that Black people are supposed to be enslaved because the Lord in the Bible said it, that you should be slaves forevermore, because I was reading the slave Bible. If that's what my slave Bible says, then do I have to sit in lessons in the classroom that talk about like pre-colonial African history or pre-enslavement history of the indigenous people and pre-colonization and pre-genocide? If I believe that only the white Christian nationalist version of Christianity is what matters, does that mean that anytime there's a subject in the classroom that deals with the fact that many of the founding fathers were atheists or non-Christian, does that mean that I get to leave that civics portion of the class? Now, and I got to thinking about this because, and this is something I talk about a bit more extensively in today's podcast episode, because in my household where I was raised, this was a decision that would have been received with a lot of praise, because we were a very religious household. We would have heard about this decision on like Trinity Broadcast Network or 700 Club or something with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, or like something on the top Christian talk radio, because we listened to a lot of those programs, and we would have heard a decision like this and said, yes, Christianity rules the day because the Lord said that it should be Christians above all else. Now, the Lord ain't never say that, but some of the indoctrination that we embraced when we were brought up in a Christian faith allows for that. But what if my Christian faith says that women should be subservient to men? A lot of y'all are in marriages right now where that is the underlying Christian belief. And if that is the underlying Christian belief, and it is a violation of my religious rights to have my children in classrooms taught by women, because women are supposed to be at home according to my Christian belief. In fact, I shouldn't even have to send my daughter to school, because I don't believe daughters are supposed to be educated, because that is a violation of my Christian beliefs. Like, how far does this go? And I think this is really important, because if my religion tells me that blacks aren't equal to whites and women aren't equal to men and girls don't deserve things and the gays don't belong in anywhere, like if that's what my religious belief is, then what does that mean for what's happening in the classroom? Conversely, what if I'm a black liberation theologist and I believe that black people should be free and that the Black Madonna is a thing, and then if I believe that white nationalism is a demon from the pit of hell that should be bound up and cursed and sent back to the abyss in the blood of Jesus, and I rebuke it therefore. Like, if I believe that, then should we be even having lessons in the classroom about enslavement at all? Should we be having lessons in the classroom that talk about how some of the founding fathers were enslavers? Because if I'm a black liberation theologist and I'm completely in a belief system that is opposite of everything that the white Christian nationalist says, who wins in that debate? Which group's religion matters? Let's say I'm Buddhist, and none of this shit should be happening. Because if you're not chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, what are we doing? We are not, like, so we got to ask these questions. And I want you all to listen to this clip. This is a clip of a Unitarian Universalist pastor, which is really interesting because years and years and years ago, my husband and I got ordained as Universalist pastors so we could marry some of our friends. We could do like wedding ceremonies for some of our friends. So when I saw this video clip, I was like, aha, this is important. I mean, I want you to play this clip. Instagram, you guys should be able to hear it because she's going to play it out loud. YouTube, you all will definitely be able to hear it. Let's take a listen to how other parts of the faith community are responding to this level of judicial activism.
So, Unitarian Universalist parents in Texas, I believe that the Supreme Court just gave you justification to call up the principal of your child's school and let them know that if the 10 Commandments are on the wall of a classroom, as the Texas Ledge has just made into law, that you will be opting out, and they've got a problem. The Supreme Court just said that the religious rights of parents are burdened if they must, quote, submit their children to instruction that poses a very real threat of undermining the religious beliefs and practices that the parents wish to instill. Well, In the wording of the 10 Commandments that the Texas Ledge has said has to be put on every classroom wall, the very first commandment says, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. However, in Unitarian Universalism, one of our shared values, as enshrined in our Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws, is the value of pluralism. The directive in the very first commandment undermines the free practice of our faith. Let the lawsuits begin.
Let the lawsuits begin. Because I am a Black Christian Buddhist woman mother who has children who have to go to school on a regular basis. And I don't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't stand for the singing of the national anthem. Should my child be forced to do so? Because it's against our religious beliefs. Somebody in the YouTube chat said, yeah, let's bring back some Jeremiah Wright. Let's bring on some Otis Moss III. Let's bring on some Freddie Haynes and some Howard Thurman, some James Cone. Let's talk about what we really want to see. Because if my religion says that Black people are the originators of the planet, if my religion tells me that white Christian nationalism is a diabolic demon from the pit of the abyss and it should be banished back to hell, if my religion is telling me that, frankly, what if my religion is matriarchal? What if my religion says that men are actually subservient to women and that this whole patriarchy is an upside down example of how things should not be? And we can tell because all the wars are started by men. And when women were in charge, that didn't happen. What if that's what my religion says? So the only way what this court does or what the court did can work is if the only religion we're prioritizing is the white Christian nationalist religion. Now, it just so happens that there was a Muslim family in this case, and a Ukraine Orthodox Christian in this case, and another I can't remember what the other group was, representative was. But basically, there was a situation where it just so happened that their beliefs were also in line with Christianity. What happens when it's the opposite? What happens when that's not the case? What happens when my religions, or maybe I'm I'm an indigenous person and I believe or I understand that two spirits exist. And in my community, because I'm indigenous, two spirits which are people who we would loosely describe as gay or trans or lesbian or part of the LGBTQ community. But in the indigenous communities, they're considered two spirits. And in those communities that take on that belief and that embrace that belief, these are people who are vitally necessary for the community because they can tap into both masculine and feminine energy. That's not just something that's indigenous American. That is something that many indigenous communities, including pre-colonial African communities, understood. The trans person in a pre-colonial African community, many of them, was a highly valued member of society because they could tap into the multiplicities of masculine and femininity. What if that's my religious belief? And you are teaching me from a perspective that says family is one man and one woman. We got to really unpack this because the reality is there's a lot of room for organizing here. There's a lot of room for Black families to show up on behalf of Black children if we put our religious supremacy aside and really start thinking about the ways we can show up more powerfully for our children to get access to what it is that they need. Because part of what motivated the Moms for Liberty, part of what motivated the takeovers of the school boards was that for years, Black parents and activists, I know because I was a part of this movement, had been fighting for culturally responsive education. Had been fighting for teachers to receive access to training that would prepare them to teach in diverse classrooms. We had been fighting for it and we were winning. The classrooms were opening up. We were seeing more and more diversity. Now, it wasn't perfect. I ain't trying to suggest that they had got it all, knocked it out the park. But that's what was happening. And now that the white nationalists have really asserted themselves in this space, we're not seeing the culturally responsive education. Anything dealing with equity is now considered illegal. We are seeing lawsuits to get this sort of information out of the schools. But if my religion requires it, seems to me like some of us in the Black community need to be exploring exactly what our religion says about what our children should learn. Because I think if we're creative and if we really explore the texts and the underpinnings of the texts, we would find that Black children should be receiving an education that is empowering, one that is going to allow them to not do, as Carter G. Woodson said in the 1930s, look for the back door, and if one is not there, go out and carve one for himself to go through because their education of inferiority requires it. If we're creative, we might be able to realize that our religions, whatever they may be, actually require a proactively Black empowered experience in education that is going to allow our babies to get access to the information that they need to come home and solve the problems that exist within the community. But only if we do it right, because what the devil meant for evil and the Supreme Court, the Lord has the possibility of turning around for our good. We're going to go to commercial break. Bye, Instagram. Appreciate you guys. 866-801-8255. 866-801-TALK is the number. I want to hear from you. What does organizing look like in your community for schools right now? How are you showing up for schools in your community last year? How did you do it? Did you not do it at all? What are you thinking about this year? We got kids who are going off to colleges where they are removing all the Black studies classes, all the women's studies classes, everything dealing with equity, and they're just now making these announcements. We got high school students who are trying to figure out what they're going to do next. We got K through 12 students who are trying to figure out how they're going to show up. We got questions. So what does community organizing for schools look like in this era? How could we tap into our knowledge, our religious practices to advocate for our children under this judicial ruling? I don't have the answers to this, but I know that together we can definitely put our heads together and solve these